What is the grossest thing you've ever had to do? I was an intern in ED. Ambulance guys bring a demented 80-year-old lady who is septic from a nursing home. The nursing home states that she'd been screaming during the day and had noticed some bloating in her abdomen. I examine her. She's skinny as a rake but her abdomen is ballooned up. On top of that she's running a fever. Abdominal x-ray shows her entire descending colon filled with feces. Call up the nursing home. Find out no one had been monitoring her bowel movements for a week. I order a simple enema. Wait an hour. Doesn't work. Poor thing is screaming in ED. I order a soap and water enema. Poor nurse tries to pump a liter of this stuff up the poor girl. Doesn't work. Frick. Me and the nurse take her to the isolation room. Get full surgical scrubs on. Double glove and manually disimpact her feces. Before we started, we just looked at each other, and I'm sure a soft whimper escaped my lips. The torrent of week-old diarrhea that came out after we removed the impacted feces was ungodly. It was just wave after wave of rancid death. The smell was so bad, secretaries in the offices in a different section of the floor were complaining about it. I showered 5 times that day, twice in the fetal position. Right after high school I worked as a butcher in a grocery store. This location was brand new and the store manager told us that she had hired someone to clean the grease trap once a month. A grease trap is basically a filter that catches solid wastes while letting the water drain. Since we worked in a meat department, solid wastes meant things like beef, pork fat and trim and miscellaneous pieces of trim that found their way down the drain. About a year after the store opened, all of the drains in the department started to clog. We opened the cover to the grease trap only to have the most rancid thing I have ever seen in my life greet my eyes. Our grease trap was roughly 3x3 feet and it was overflowing with a combination of greasy water and a year's worth of accumulated meat. So we have about 27 cubic feet of meat that has been rotting for about a year while stewing in water. The smell at this point was unbearable. It was some sort of unholy combination of rancid eggs and butt sweat. It got to the point where we had to close the entire meat department and block access to it off from customers because people were starting to dry heave and vomit when they got in range of the smell. Our store manager basically told us tough crap. I forgot to hire someone to clean it so you have to do it and I'll get someone to pick up the waste. We had just hired some new 14-year-old kid to clean the rest of the department at night, and since he was new, he was chosen as the one to clean out the trap. What this involved was this new guy getting on his hands and knees and using the biggest ladle we could find, started scooping out the rotting meat water. The kid must have had a weak stomach because immediately he starts gagging and dry heaving. 5 minutes of ladling crap out of the trap goes by and he's reached his breaking point. He turns and starts vomiting uncontrollably, right into the grease trap. The splashback sprayed everywhere. It was on his clothes, his face, his shoes, just everywhere. He started to cry and got up and slowly started shuffling towards the exit, all while gagging and leaving a trail of vomit and rotting meat water behind him. The whole store got shut down for the day after that and they must have gotten someone to come in and finish the job because the next day we came back and it was spotless. I will never see anything that tops this poor kid getting stuck cleaning the grease trap. TLDR. Kid got rotting meat stew and vomit all over himself and cried while he walked away. Your manager was a piece of crap and I literally would have punched his face. I worked for a company that did electrical work, plumbing work, and heating and cooling. I was an electrician, but wanted to learn some of the plumbing work, so they would take me on the occasional plumbing call. Well, after a few calls to fix some sinks and stuff, they said they had to de-virginize me. We got a call to go to a house at 10 PM for toilets backing up. Before we went in the house, the master plumber I was with breaks out a jar of Vaseline. I'm like, WTF. He tells me to put it under my nose and around my mouth and to trust him that it will help. So we enter the house, and all I can smell is Vaseline with a faint hint of crap. The guy at the house was bugging out about his basement, and we opened the basement door to, no joke, 4 feet of raw sewage. The guy I was with said let's go back out to the truck. We went out and he went in a box and grabbed hip waders, SP, like the kind you go fishing with, and we put them on and trudged into the sewage. Now at this point, you have to find the main sewer drain going to outside the house, which this one, after probing in the 4 feet of crap, we found out to be on the floor. We had to use a big breaker bar and a sledgehammer to break the metal cap. because neither of us were going underwater to get to that. We break it open, and no water goes out. We go to the truck again and grab a snake, and start snaking the drain, and then we start pulling out the mess. Little white mice they call them in the plumbing world, but in reality they are used tampons. Probably about 40 of them we pulled out, and then we really struck it rich. Somewhere between 50 and 100 used condoms. Tons of them. Looked like the set of a pee flick after we got it all out. As we pulled the last batch of condom junk out, as you can imagine, the forefeet started going down, and fast, like a giant drain in the middle of the floor, just guzzling all that sewage. It was unreal. Best part of the story, the guy was a single dude raising his 3 daughters, 18, 16, and 14, and when we told him what we pulled out he turned white as a ghost and told us that he worked 3 jobs and had not fricked in about 3 years. I told the guy to just sit down before he passed out, and then we hit him with a $3,000 bill and called in the cleanup crew, and I was de-virginized to my first drain cleaning call. I love that part of the final blow was finding out that at least one of his 3 teenage daughters is getting a regular pounding. So, it goes like this. I bought my first house. It had been vacant for over a year, I think. I got the keys and moved in. A couple weeks later, one of my brothers and a friend were over helping to tidy up the place. My friend comes out of the basement, alarmed, to tell me that water is pouring into the basement. I run down there. Sure enough, water is pouring out at the top of one of the interior walls. Obviously, it is a plumbing problem. I shut the water off. It doesn't stop. I check all the bathrooms and kitchens. Multi-unit. Nothing found. After a lot of running around checking drains and traps and faucets and so on, I determined that it must be that the soil stack is blocked, which is confusing because the toilets have been working fine. Anyway, I'm fortunate that there is a clean out in the elbow at the bottom of the soil stack. I get a wrench and open it. It's completely blocked. Not a single drop of water comes out. Being new to home ownership, I don't own many tools, let alone a plumbing snake. I unfold a wire hanger, push it into the brown mass, and ream it around a lot. Nothing happens. I add some twists to the wire and punch it back in. Ream some more. A little bit of sewage trickles out but still no flow in the pipe. I continue to poke and stab and twist and ream like I'm starring in some Hollywood swashbuckling sword fight. Eventually, the mass of human waste starts to break apart and 2 stories full of sewage water make it blast out the clean out hole. For what seemed like a good 2 or 3 minutes, crap and pee and God knows what else sprayed out of this hole. It went everywhere, all over my washing machine, a couple walls, the floor, in my hair, my face, down my arm, eventually the rest of my body, everywhere. It was disgusting, and then I had to clean it up. TLDR. I took a poop shower. I wasn't there, but this is what I was told. My parents are out of town at a wedding, a friend's daughter or something. Anyway, at the reception, another guest goes outside for smoke. He looks across the grounds to see some guys working. He goes over to check it out. It turns out that these guys have excavated and are replacing a septic tank. There is this big open pit with a bunch of muddy poop water and chemicals in the bottom. Of course, this guy steps a little too close to the edge and slips. He tumbles all the way and splashes down. After the workers help him out of the hole, he was completely soaked, head to toe. He had to do the walk of shame back into the reception to get his wife to drive him to the hotel for clean clothes. I guess it was pretty awful and hysterical to everyone else. When I was 3 months pregnant, I was still throwing up about 8-10x a day, always nauseous, and really struggling because my 18-month-old son was so active. One day, we came home to find that my yellow lab had been sick and pooped all over the living and dining rooms. So I cleaned it all up, throwing up a couple of times, the smell, my god, and was laying my head down on the kitchen counter for a second when I heard chocolate. I turned to face my son, and actually had the thought, where on earth did he find a brownie? Clearly, out of self-preservation. Holding on to this thought with all my might, I walked over to him and sniffed his chocolate-covered mouth. I immediately projectile vomited all over his stomach and arms, because of course, he had tried to eat dog crap. So now he's crying, and I am uncontrollably vomiting and crying, while I rinse out his mouth until he's finally clean. I hand him an apple, and he says, "That chocolate bad, mommy," and he walks off to play like nothing happened. So I went and cleaned up the rest of the crap I'd missed, then made lunch. Welcome to the romantic life of a stay-at-home mom. The aristocrats. From my father. He worked for a company responsible for helping to restore communications after 9/11. He was at ground zero the morning of 9/12, but at the basement of the Verizon building. While working in there, he said there was this horrible smelling oozing goo dripping into the basement. He soon found out it was dead human matter coming from burnt and rotten corpses of the 9/11 victims. I was trying out for an ice hockey team as a goaltender. I wasn't conditioned, and they just kept working me. That's when I started to feel sick. I instantly skated off to the boards and puked in my mouth. Trying not to look like a pea, I swallowed all of it. Little did I know puke tasted like puke, and made me puke up even more. I swallowed my own puke about 5 times until I just stopped giving a crap and projectile vomited onto the benches. TLDR, I chunned it everywhere. My brother Pete would say, "Well, no wonder he threw up. He was full of puke." In recent memory, unclogging the plumbing at my house, I finally heard the water gurgle down in the toilet, so I begin the slow process of pulling the auger back out of the pipe. It gets toward the end, covered in black sewage, when I notice something hanging from the coil. It looks like a dead mouse. Closer inspection reveals a tampon, followed by another, and another. It was like a freaking string of Christmas lights. At least 15 of them hanging off the coil. You also have to realize that the auger twists as it goes through the pipe, so the strings are tightly wounded. You have to untwist each tampon by hand in order to completely remove it. Ladies, if you ever thought for a second that string might break, I assure you that Wonder Woman's vajayjay probably couldn't even hold those things tight enough to accomplish that. In conclusion, ladies, throw your poon sponges in the trash, not the shitter. Ladies, throw your poon sponges in the trash, not the shitter. That's like the first thing I learned in Poon Sponges 101. Come on, ladies, seriously. My nephew was sick and just about to throw up on my new couch. I cupped my hands and he filled them. Didn't spill a drop. Did the same thing but with a friend's puppy peeing on my bed. I'm really surprised that there isn't any stories that involve being a janitor. I work in a department store for old women. When they let loose on a toilet in the bathroom, they have absolutely no regard for the person who has to clean it up. I come in one morning to clean before the store opens and there is smell of crap coming from the ladies' bathroom. I think, no problem, nothing I can't handle. There are 4 stalls in this particular bathroom. The second stall had crap all over the toilet. How could anyone possibly crap on the handle that flushes the toilet? When it comes down to the last stall, I was horrified. It's as if someone was tap dancing and crapping at the same time. I mean, it's freaking everywhere. On the handicap rails, on the walls, and somehow on top of the toilet paper dispenser. But I had to clean up after my own vomit when I was near completion of cleaning that putrid atrocity. I left work early and had chills and flashbacks for the whole day. 3 showers were had that day. It's as if someone was tap dancing and crapping at the same time. Upvote for this mental image. I have so many repressed memories from growing up on a farm. Parents raised dogs. My dad did cleanup and maintenance all his life, often on rental units, that I wouldn't know where to begin. How about 2 summers ago, I had a nice herd of goats and one of the young nannies got pregnant earlier than I would have liked. When she was due, I went to check on her. Apparently she had tried to deliver already, but due to being young and small herself, the baby got stuck. Only his head was sticking out of her. To make matters worse, this probably happened the day before, or even 2 days, as the reason I was checking her was because I hadn't seen her for a day or 2 and animals in distress often hide themselves away. So I had to go catch her, which was not hard because she was weak from the attempted delivery and day or more of dead baby goat plugging up her backside. After I had her laying on her side, I very carefully grabbed the head of the dead baby and pulled every so slowly with one hand while I ran my other hand around the edge of the baby and slowly pushed my fingers into her birth canal to both widen the opening and help lubricate the movement. The smell, it was horrible. Rotting baby goat, placenta, blood, all ripe in the hot Alabama summer heat. I could feel the baby trying to break apart and I was scared it wouldn't leave some of itself inside of her. Finally, ever so slowly it started coming out. I was able to snake my finger in there and wrap it around one foreleg and unkink it and pull it out. Then the same for the other leg. At that point most of the obstruction was relieved and the thing literally shot out of her with a slurch sound. It was quickly followed by a gush of greyish red fluid, and then she started pee all over me. Guess that was blocked up too. I cleaned her up as best I could, using several bottles of that purple crap. Betadine I think, and rags. I buried the baby, burned the rags and my t-shirt I had on, and then took several showers. And since I was in such a hurry I didn't have time to find rubber gloves. This was all done barehanded. I read this as parents raised by dogs. One summer I worked part-time at a pizza place. Once a week we would cook 10-12 pounds of ground beef and drain the fat into a 5-gallon pail. The pail sat for months festering next to the pizza oven until one day my manager ordered me to take it to the dumpster. I was 12 years old at the time and had difficulty lifting pail, so I swung it back and forth until it had gained enough momentum to clear the 5 or so feet up and into the dumpster. To my horror the pail smashed against the lip of the dumpster, popping the top off and blasting a wave of stinking fat directly into my face. I was covered in dripping wet goo and immediately started vomiting. The restaurant had to be evacuated as well as the liquor store next door. I can still smell it to this day. Awful. Party at our apartment. Fried rice was made. Drinks were consumed. Times of fun were had. Woke up the next morning to a puke covered bathroom. Puke all over the actual counter. Okay, I guess. Toilet miraculously clean. Puke in the shower tub. Bad. Rice puke filling the sink. Worse. Puke on the back of the bathroom door. How? And puke running down the counter and pooling inside all the cupboards. I don't eat now. The culprits were known. One tried to clean it up but all ended up bailing. Working in an office doesn't faze me too much, but the kicker was that before someone passed out the previous night, they had flipped on the overhead heater in the bathroom. Cleaning up puke is one thing. Cleaning up 8-hour preheated puke is an entirely different situation. IV rep. I gave mouth to my dog when I was 12. She had choked on a dog treat and was barely breathing. There wasn't enough time to make it to the vet, so I did what I could. She ended up spitting the treat out and survived. Heroics. Grossness. I was driving down a highway in rural Maine that runs through uninhabited townships on my way to visit my parents up north. People usually go around 80-90 mph on this highway, and it's used mostly by truckers. Anyway, some car passes me because I was only going 75 miles per hour. As soon as the car gets in front of me, a deer comes running out and the car in front of me hits it dead on. The deer for the most part seemed to explode on impact, rolling over her car and smacking down right in front of me, with guts, muscle, blood, and intestine spraying back onto my windshield. The car itself careened off the road into a field, several hundred feet away. I pulled off to the side of the road, called 911, and ran over to where the other car had wound up. It was completely totaled and the woman inside was pretty banged up but alert and talking. I stayed with her until the ambulance and the cops came. As I was leaving and I approached my truck, I realized the entire front half of my truck was drenched in blood and deer parts. I tried not to look at what was left of the corpse, but even glances of the thing made me want to puke. I got as much blood off with my windshield wipers as I could, but I turned heads when I got into town in my Garamobile, and when I got home, my father and I had to fish deer bits out of my grill, truck bed, and wipers, while hosing it off. It was foul. I'm not a super girly girl, but just the sight of blood makes me feel weak. And I had never seen so much in one place before. Ugh. TLDR your car turned into the Gua tour bus. Went out to a movie with my ex I lived with at the time. Had made hamburgers for dinner on the George Foreman grill before we left. I hadn't cleaned the grease tray yet. I was going to clean that up when I got home. Big mistake. My cat decided to eat the entire grease tray while we were out. This caused him to turn into a kitty fountain from both ends. He ran around the apartment projectiling for a couple of hours. My best guess, there wasn't a room in that apartment that wasn't contaminated. When I opened the door, it was just an immediate slap in the face of horrible stench. Took me a couple of hours to get it all cleaned up. Upvoted for kitty fountain. Made me laugh. cleaning the goddamn grease trap at the pizza joint where I worked. I still have nightmares about that freaking thing. Held a dying child's brains in after an auto accident. I'm sorry. I keep monitor lizards as pets. They're smart and friendly enough to roam the house freely since I took great care in training them. They eat large adult rats. Fun fact, their saliva contains immense amounts of necrotizing bacteria, as well as a mild venom. Well, my large one, Thunderdick, gets clumsy on feeding day. He nips the rat on the tail and the sucker runs under the fridge to hide. I figure that he'll wait it out. They're extremely thorough and persistent. No, he was lazy. 2 days later I see a rat's tail poking out from under the fridge. It looked intact, so I go to yank the sucker out. Turns out that the lizard's death spit turned the rat into a furry balloon of awesomeness. Blop, the rat carcass pops audibly and black filth spills out in a wave. I throw up immediately and fall over, feeling like I got shot from the sheer force of the stench. I could taste the smell for days. It tasted like I ate out a freaking Ebola zombie, till lizard venom turned a rat into the world's foulest water balloon. Upvote for Thunderdick. Dig through my own turd for something I accidentally swallowed. I wore several sets of gloves and threw away anything that came into contact with said turd. This is not something that I had to do, but my friend did by accident. Still, it's pretty gross. A few years back I had been sick for about a week with awful congestion in my throat. This caused me to spit constantly, and my container of choice was an old Keystone beer can. Later that week, we had a party, and this kid was drinking Keystone. He accidentally put his beer down near my spit can and, due to some force of nature, after a while confused the two. He drank my spit can by accident. The look on his face was priceless when he drank it. It wasn't until I told him, after I realized what happened, that I had been spitting in that cup for a week that he started to gag and throw up in the trash can. So gross, yet so funny. I have been physically affected by this story. I was 16 years old and just started my first legit part-time job. This was in the gas station in my hometown, small town of around 500 people or so. So it is a hot summer day, Saturday I think, and the place is busy as usual. Our local school would host all sorts of events for sports during the summer, and it would bring quite a few people to town. So I'm in the walk-in cooler, stocking sodas, doing the normal routine. I walk up front, hit the cash register for a few customers to clear the line out. Then I'm heading back to the cooler when I notice a lady open the door to the bathroom, single toilet, neutral, and stumble back out and leave. I didn't think anything of it and kept doing my thing. After a bit more cooler stocking I walk back out and see another customer open the bathroom door and leave abruptly. So I decide it's time to take a look and see what the deal was. I just assumed some jackass pee all over the place, or at worst didn't flush a massive crap or it backed up. I couldn't have been more wrong. I'm not sure, because I've never seen another scene like this. However, I'm fairly certain I walked into the aftermath of a gas station miscarriage. Holy. Had to clear a blocked hallway-esque passage in the gut floor of the meat processing plant when I was 18ish. Literally up to my thighs in sheep and lamb carcasses that have their stomachs cut open and insides falling out. To clear them out I had to stick my bare hands inside them and grab them by the spine and lift them up and chuck them into a massive grinder blender type machine. These carcasses were all condemned cannot be sold as food, so many were rotten inside, etc. It wasn't really unsettling gross for me, but others would deem it that. I also worked in a rendering plant for 3 years between years at uni. There were a few gross things that happened there. I have a few scars from boiling tallow burns. Had machines explode hot sheep and cow guts all over me, plus many more lovely things. I used to rebuild houses after fires, floods, etc. We were gutting this house a few months after a fire. Place is trashed. No one has lived there for months. No electric, water, etc. We had to take this big storage freezer out of the basement. It's heavy as balls and big, so we had a few people carrying it, coming down the steps outside. I am on the bottom. It starts dripping and leaking juice from being on an angle. The juice is running down my arms into my shirt. This has got to be the most foul smelling, rotting flesh and meat, rotten food juice that's coming out of this thing. It's so foul. Everyone starts freaking out carrying down the steps. We finally drop it in the yard. It rolls into its side and the door pops open from all the slop and sludge inside starts to ooze out into the yard. Everyone scatters because the smell is so freaking nasty. Rotten stink. We had to be a good 100 featuring away from it and everyone was still gagging because the odor was so strong even outside. Everyone was wrapping rags around their face soaked in industrial strength smell good. I was low man totem, so I had to clean it all up so we could drag the freezer to the dumpster. Freaking grossest crap ever. Pretty much all of New Orleans when I went for spring break to clean up after the hurricane. The first thing you learn when gutting houses is do not open the fridge. Steaks left to rot for months in heat, humidity, and floodwater are no less nasty than rotting human flesh. That and the mold growing up the walls. Finding a dead rat in a vase in someone's kitchen. And the general puke-scented debauchery of Bourbon Street, which was still going strong. And the fact that all the workers had to just choose people's yards to poop in, because there wasn't any plumbing anywhere. That wasn't that gross, but it did sort of reinforce the idea that this place that was a neighborhood not long ago was now post-apocalyptic wilderness. Stumbled upon a dead body in the park, flies and all. I bet you were jogging. In high school I was an Explorer Scout. Think Boy Scouts for fire departments. Anyways, it basically ended up being B duty for the guys that didn't want to do something. So one day we got a call to assist some EMTs carrying a stretcher down the stairs. Important note, it was a 600-pound man. I get there and find out we are moving him to the hospital because of all of the bed sores he has accrued from being obese and not moving ever. There's a good 8 guys carrying this stretcher when I heard a faint pop. Then what can only be described as some smell Satan himself came up with appeared in the air. I just assumed the fat bastard farted. Nope, a few seconds later some liquid seeped down on my hand. I was down on the lower end of the stretcher. Turns out his right testicle was infected and burst. I showered and showered but I could still smell that awful smell on me. It's the summer of 1999 and I'm 12 years old. I'm playing tag in my backyard with my sister. 2 of my friends and 2 of her friends. We're getting really into the game and I'm it. I start after my sister and I'm really closing in on her, but out of the corner of my eye I see my awesome black lab, RIP Snowy, squatting. Usually I think nothing of my dog's crapping habits, but I couldn't help but notice a yellow, clear substance hanging from his butt. I stopped the game and ran over to him, realizing the yellowy mass dangling from his nethers was a plastic bag still partially full of marinade from my mom's roasted chicken last night. Being home alone and the oldest, I took it upon myself to remove the bag from his butt. Later, when my mom came home and I told her what happened and the dog had been to the vet, I was told that what I did was very dangerous. Still, I slapped on a pair of gardening gloves, said a prayer and yanked. He grunted a bit, took a few shaky steps but was right as rain in a few seconds. I know what I did was wrong, disgusting and depraved, but he lived to be 15 years old, which is amazing for a dog of his size, so I think I did alright. The smell of lemon herbs and crap was terrible though. I actually came out of lurkerdom and made an account for this. I'm an RN. I once cared for a young man, in his 50s, who had become paraplegic after surgery to repair an aneurysm. He would develop UTIs or infections in wounds on his back and come to the hospital. He couldn't feel the pressure or the dressing changes, so at least that was a blessing. Eventually, after multiple readmissions, there came a time where we knew he wouldn't survive the sepsis from the infection. He had a few pressure ulcers, but the worst was in the middle of his back. It was big enough to put your fist in, it went to the vertebrae and you could see dorsal nerve roots. We actually had to rotate nurses to care for him, i.e., we each took a turn so no one had to change his dressings each day. Like I said, at least he couldn't feel it. Eventually, his body didn't recognize the lower half of his body anymore. It literally started to rot while the rest of him was still talking, eating, joking, etc. By the time he died, he signed his own DNR. He was blue and green from just above his belly button to his toes. And I don't mean stuff growing on the outside. I mean his skin was this rotten mottled mess. On the day he died, after his family and friends left, we had to call all hands and to help do post-mortem care and get him in the shroud. The stink was so horrific, I lack the vocabulary to adequately describe it. It actually burned my nasal passages and sinuses, which turned into a post-nasal drip, and then bronchitis. That's some potent stink. It was a few years and hundreds of patients ago and I still remember him very well. He was actually a really nice guy. TLDR. Paraplegic's body rejects lower half. Rots. Rot stink causes physical harm to nursing staff. I used to install medical equipment in clients' homes for a living. Went to a real rundown home. It was a beautiful spring day and the air was cool and fresh. When the client opened the door, all I could smell was dog crap. The crap was all over the floors. As I went into the tiny bedroom, I pushed aside what I thought was a thick velvet rope hanging from the door frame. It wasn't a velvet rope. It was one of those hanging sticky fly traps. Got the heck out of there as fast as I could. I used to be a med lab tech. One of the grosser tasks involved trying to find a human specimen for the customers of our laboratory robots to practice with. So about once a month they would bring me a case of cervical samples, pap smears, from a commercial lab that had been tested once but contained enough specimen left to be tested again. One of the objectives was to demonstrate to the customer how our refinement process removed blood from the final sample, so I was instructed to take only the bloodiest pap samples and refill the plastic vial with a suspension fluid. Now usually a pap just involved using a brush and lightly collecting some cells from the surface of the cervix, but for some reason we had a decent amount of samples coming through that had large pieces of flesh and loose bloody tissue suspended in globs of T secretions. Refilling the vial was a splash hazard, so I wore a face shield and plastic smock over my lab coat. Regularly had to wipe pieces of cervical splash back off the facial area. Cervix with a smile. At work one day I took a massive crap and it was so long and solid that it refused to bend through the pipes and be carried onto its watery afterlife. I ended up having to use an empty paper towel tube to pull the crap up out of the water a bit and busted it in half. The smell, the crap on the empty tube, the sheer fact that I was handling my own feces was horrendous. To this day I'm still proud of that beast though. It was magnificently large. Same situation, although I had a less hands-on approach. I broke off a string of dental floss and tied both ends to a wet chunk of toilet paper. This gave the ends more weight, and after tossing it into the toilet and flushing, the force of the water dragged the ends in first, allowing the floss to cut the stool neatly in half. A car crashed in my backyard. I helped pull the passenger out of the car and noticed his eyeball was dangling out of its socket. I had just finished some basic first aid courses, and I knew what had to be done. He helped me shove his own eye back into its socket. They did not teach that in any basic first aid courses I've taken. Doctor shadowing. Saw him pull feces out of an old man, and there were wriggling maggots in it. I find the whole process very mechanical and not gross at all, but most of my friends disagree with me. I work at a school for special ed kids. They wear diapers. Some of the kids are big, 200 pounds. They poop it. Sometimes they get the runs. Sometimes they dig. Sometimes they smear. I clean every day. You truly are a pretty cool guy. I couldn't do that, ever. My ex had gained a lot of weight from a poor diet and a schedule of always partying, studying, sleeping around. This comes into play later. Before I knew she was slinging her butt around for the city, I just watched her gain some weight. So at this point she showers often, but her thighs start touching and she is just not smelling so great in her crotch. No matter how much she washed, it just never went away. One night she got hammered, shows up at my door promising backdoor riding if I go down on her. I reluctantly did it, gagging the whole time. Thank God for her being drunk, because I put no effort into it. It was so rank I almost vomited on the spot several times. She finally went to the doctors a week later because of all the constant itching she had going on. Started before the above night. Turns out she has a major yeast infection, as well as strep, all in her vag. I certainly didn't have strep, so began my first glimpse into her cheating. When I heard that, I about threw up in my finance class. I've never been right in the head since. I don't think you were right in the head to begin with when you agreed to her proposition. I thought it would be cute to give my then 5-mo Rotty a small crown of broccoli. He played with it up and down the hall like it was a toy until he ate it. So I gave him one more and watched gleefully as I finished cooking dinner. Fast forward until about an hour after putting him into his crate for the night. I have never seen so much crap everywhere in my entire life. The smell alone was terrifying. He managed to coat his crate, the walls and the floor with this nasty pasty poop. Amazingly, he only had it on his feet from standing it. Took around 1-2 hours to clean him, his area and the crate. Lesson learned. Last year, my stovetop started acting up and the light didn't work when you had the burner on. There was a weird, burning smell when it was on. So I turned off the breaker and called our appliance service company. The guy came out and opened the back of the stove and there was a dead rat stuck between the electrical poles behind the knobs. It had made a circuit and electrocuted itself. He wouldn't touch it because it wasn't covered by the service contract. I had to pull the stove out and pull the rat out by the tail with my gloved hand and put it in a box. Then I buried it. It smelled pretty bad once I pulled it out and broke open the cauterized hole in its neck. Then I had to use alcohol to clean all of the electrical contacts of the nest left behind. In hindsight, there was a little bit of a smell when we came home the night before, but I thought the dogs needed a bath. It is an old house, but the stove is new. I went under the house and found where it got in and sealed it. TLDR. I had to remove a dead, electrocuted rat from my stove and bury it. I have a cyst on my collarbone, and they attempted to lance it and remove the pus once. It didn't work. I now have a small hole, like a pimple, from where I can fire pus across a bathroom and cover a bathroom mirror. I am not joking. The smell is nauseating. One time my obese friend thought she had left a tampon in and couldn't find it. She asked me to fish it out. Your name made me sing to myself. 1 little, 2 little, 3 little tampons. In college I had a job in the biology department prepping the materials for the teaching labs. One of the labs that I prepped was the anatomy and physiology lab. One of the downsides to using humans for teaching tools is that they wear out eventually and you have to get a new corpse. The ones that we used came from the medical school, OHSU. In order to preserve the bodies long enough to make them usable, you have to embalm the crap out of them. This means that they leak somewhat, lots at first and then diminishing over time. After we picked up a fresh one, myself and another student picked up the bag that the body was in to put it on the dissection table. Human remains are really awkward to move, much harder than a mattress. We slipped a bit and I fell on my butt, causing all the fluid that had accumulated in the bag to squirt out of the gap in the bag's zipper and drenching me. I was soaked from the chest down in corpse juice. I did some pretty repugnant crap in that job, but that was the only time I puked. I used to work at a kennel and had to clear the anal glands of the dogs we bathed. Cleaning their buttholes are gross, but it's not the worst thing. You squeeze, foul putrid smelling brownish clearish liquid comes out. It's done. You take your gloves off and still wash the frick out of your hands. Big deal. After bathing an older dog named Wiggles, I went to clean his, and what came out was the color and consistency of custard, if not a little whiter, paler. Enough came out to fill a small condiment bowl, like the ones you see at restaurants with like ketchup in them or what have you. It got all over my hand, and it was freaking disgusting. The stench. Shudder. Also that same day, a co-worker of mine did it for another dog she'd just bathed to learn that it had tapeworms. She learned this by having them shoot out of its butt and past her face, and onto her arm. Butt juice filled with tapeworms. I used to work at a nightclub as a busboy. Just about every other weekend I would have to clean puke out of a urinal or multiple pukes out of multiple urinals. Used to work at a fast food ice cream restaurant. We had a local, special person who would drink a half gallon of orange juice and then come eat a large ice cream to make himself puke. In our bathroom. Not in the toilet, either. All over the place. What the frick? Not as much gross, but it caused a couple people to faint. Need to sit down. I had anchor stitches left in my arm from an elbow ball replacement surgery a few years ago. My body has been rejecting the foreign stitches for a while and have had open wounds for over 3 years. One day one of the stitches began to surface, so I decided to remove it myself. The problem was, even though these stitches looked like separate loops, they were in fact all interlocked. I ended up pulling with all my might to pull out a good 2-inch segment of stitching through my arm, pulling out oodles of pus and scar tissue. This left a nice oozing chasm in my elbow that pulsed for a while. This didn't really creep me out, but I am used to handling such issues with my conditions. But the rest of the room who came in, out of curiosity, quickly vacated. I probably have a few more that beat that in grossness, but this was definitely the coolest. TLDR. Pulled interior stitches out of arm. Pulled out more arm than stitches with it. My dad was a really crappy bastard. When I was younger, it was absolutely imperative that I eat every single thing on my plate. This was difficult, as we'd have huge portions. I had several techniques for disposing of my food, but one of my original ones had severe repercussions. I was probably 7 or 8 and we had one of those tables that had removable leaves to extend the table. The leaves were never on, as it was just 3 of us, but there were metal runners underneath the table that they would connect to should we have used them. These runners served as food storage devices for me. I would simply jam whatever I couldn't eat up inside of them. This went on for a couple months before I discovered the old chew up the broccoli and cover mouth with napkin and cough broccoli into napkin trick. One day I came home from school and my dad was on his back underneath the table with a spoon. He saw me and his face darkened. I knew this was bad. He came up and grabbed me by my ear, wrenched it around and dragged me down to the floor, pointing angrily up at the runner under the table. He ordered me to stick my finger in the black recesses of the runner. I was scared shitless as I'd mostly forgotten about all of the food I'd jammed in there and imagined something was going to bite my finger off. Instead, I got a fingerful of green-gray goop, quivering with maggots. He didn't let me use the spoon, made me use my fingers to scoop all of it out of there. It took me an hour and I vomited twice. I'm still deathly afraid of maggots. Clean the dead skin off the homeless shelter mattresses. Sometimes scrape. Good times. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.